And that's it, done. Just check out that super glossy, luscious sauce. And that beef, let me tell you guys, is super tender. This is my version of Mongolian beef. Mongolian beef. The origins of this dish are a little murky. Some say it originated in Taiwan, some in China, some in Chinese restaurants in America. I have fabulous memories of this dish growing up, eating it in Chinese restaurants in Australia. For me, the dish is all about that really beautiful, sweet, glossy sauce, the onion, and a super tender strip of beef. So let's get going on the beef first of all, because I've got quite a few tips and tricks for getting just the right texture. Now, I'm going to do this on a bit of a budget. I'm using flank steak today. So flank steak is a cheaper cut of steak and can be tough if you don't deal with it in the right way. But we're going to deal with it in the right way, don't worry. So it looks like this flat, thin, long piece. And if you have a look here, the grains run long, all the way along the piece here. And what we want to do is, first of all, cut with the grain. So I get 2 pieces. And now you want to cut against the grain. So the cutting with and against is really important, because cutting against the grain means that we're going to get a more tender strip of beef, and also cutting on an angle is going to help with that as well. This is super important when you're using cheaper cuts of beef. Now the other important part is the marinade. I've got some special ingredients that are going to help with tenderizing that beef and getting the right texture. So first of all, pretty standard soy sauce. Now I also want some Chinese Shaoxing wine here. And now those of you who have been watching my channel for a while will know my little trick here, but I use some corn flour, and the corn flour will help to kind of coat the outside of the beef and give us that glossy texture. And then baking soda, just a little dash. And the baking soda is going to help tenderize the beef and help it brown quicker, which means it'll cook quicker, stay nice and tender, all those things. And you really need to get in here with your hands and mix everything. Make sure each of those pieces of beef has a nice coating of that marinade. Now for the stir fry sauce, really simple, just some soy sauce, chicken stock, some brown sugar, and a little bit more Chinese wine. Let's give that a mix to help that sugar dissolve a little bit. And now let's get our beef cooking. Now with a secondary cut of steak like we're using, the flank steak, it's really important the way we cook the beef, because this is where things can go wrong also. So what I want to do is pay close attention to the beef and just cook it on its own. I'll take it out and then we'll make the vegetables and sauce separately. It will all come together beautifully, I promise. A little bit of oil in my hot pan first of all. Get that beef in there, and you really want to get it spread out. So spreading the beef out means that we're getting as much heat contact with each little piece of beef as possible. And that's going to promote browning, quicker cooking, and also make sure we're not stewing the beef. We want to sear the beef. Now just leave it for a minute or so. I want to get some color on there before I start stir frying. Now you can see we've already got a little bit of color on there, which is great. I want to give it a bit of a flip and then let it cook again, get some more color. Now when that beef is just barely cooked, possibly still even a little bit pink in places, I'm going to take it out. And you want to spread it out as much as possible. I don't want it all bunched up and steaming and producing moisture. Now straight back into the same pan, I'm going to put some onion. And depending on how fatty your beef is, you might need to add a bit of oil here. I'm going to add a little bit more. Okay, now in goes some ginger, some garlic. And then these are an optional, but I quite like to add some dried red chilies here as well. Just going to snip them straight in. Now I'm going to deglaze the pan and lift off all of that beefy kind of stuff stuck to the bottom of the pan, all that flavour. I'm going to deglaze it with our sauce. Just give that sauce a minute or so to bubble away, for that sugar to dissolve and start to thicken and sweeten up the sauce. Now I'm going to add in some corn flour mixed with a little bit of water just to thicken everything up. And I love how magically glossy everything becomes almost instantly. Now I'm going to get my beef back in there. and some spring onion. And then just look at that lusciousness. And that's it, done. Thank goodness, because it's making me really hungry. All right, let's get that out onto a plate. So there you go, my friends, my version of Mongolian beef. Let's see how we've gone. Wow, it is crazy how tender that beef is. I mean, to be able to use a cheaper cut like that and turn into something so luscious like this, now that's magic. Sauce, sweet, salty, perfection. Super tender, glossy pork strips stir-fried in a Korean style sauce. This one is super simple but so packed full of flavor. This is my spicy Korean pork stir-fry. So there are a few things that we do with stir fries at home that sometimes I think make them not as special as they can be. So I'm going to run through all my little very important tips and tricks for getting like the ultimate kind of stir fry, plus a special little ingredient that I'm going to add at the end that you wouldn't necessarily think of for a stir fry but will blow you away. Okay, so let's get started on the marinade part first, and we're going to do a marinade that turns into the sauce for the stir fry. So we only need to make one sauce. First off, we need some Korean gochujang chili paste. Looks like this, comes in these little red tubs, and I want quite a bit of this luscious red stuff. Now don't be alarmed, it's bright red, but it isn't super spicy. I mean, it does have a little bit of a kick, but it's more about the kind of savory umami flavors with this one, with a little bit of the chili spice. To that, I'm gonna add some soy sauce, some sesame oil, just a little dash of sugar, and some grated ginger. Now just give that a mix. Now let's chat about our pork. Now, choosing cuts of meat for a stir fry is where things can go a little bit wrong when you're doing a stir fry at home. So for me, I like to go with the slightly fattier cuts, particularly with pork. Pork fillet is one of the things that's often recommended for a stir fry, but there's hardly any fat and it can get quite tough. So I like to go with this cut of pork, slightly fattier. It's called a pork Scotch fillet, also known as pork shoulder, pork neck, it's sometimes called. Basically, you're after this cut of pork with that little bit of fat through it. If you can't get this particular cut of pork, try pork belly. Thin slices of pork belly are beautiful in a stir fry. So that's tip number one, choose the right cut of meat. And then we want to slice it really thin. The thinner you can slice your meat for a stir fry, the more sauce you're going to get absorbing right throughout that little slice of meat, and plus the quicker it'll cook, and hopefully the quicker it'll cook, the more tender it will be at the end. Now get all of that pork into your marinade. Actually, chicken thighs work really well here, or beef as well. I'll just give that a good mix. Now, this does not need one of those epic long marinade times. Just a few minutes while we're preparing the other ingredients is all good. So I'm gonna do some spring onion for the end. Now, here's my other tip for stir frying. It's kind of like, you know, when people talk about pizza and chucking a whole bunch of stuff on the pizza, and then you kind of mix up all the flavors and you don't get the really good dough and the right ratio of cheese. And anyway, it's like that. Choose less. Less is more when it comes to a stir fry. So choose one or two vegetables plus your meat, and that's pretty much all you need. So I'm going with some spring onion, and oftentimes you'll find that the spring onion down the end is quite thick. So I like to thin that out a little bit. And then cut this into battens. It's like another vegetable in our stir fry rather than just being a garnish. And the other thing I need for the end of our stir fry is a lemon. We'll deal with that a bit later on. Okay, now we're ready to stir fry. Now when your wok is nice and hot, add some oil. You could also do this in a large frying pan as well, it doesn't have to be a wok. Add in some garlic and some onions. Now spread those out a little, make some room. And then add in your pork. Now as soon as you get that pork in there, spread it right out as far as it'll go. I want as much pork coming into contact with the hot pan as quickly as possible. And then don't touch it. So here's where you can also go wrong at home. You know when you see those Chinese chefs like stir frying vigorously in a restaurant. That's great because they've got really high hot heat, but I find with home gas burners or electric stovetops, you don't get that same heat. So you kind of got to let the heat do its work on the pork before you start messing around with it. All right, so half a minute or so, and now we toss. And then again, spread everything out. Let the meat cook a little bit, and then stir fry. Repeat that 3 or 4 times until the pork is just cooked. Now, the other vegetable I've chosen is some carrots, some finely shredded carrot. Also going to add in my spring onion. Oh, I just love how glossy and colourful and beautiful that stir fry looks. Now, when the pork is cooked through, I'm going to turn the heat off, add in some sesame seeds. And then here's my little secret ingredient, which is not traditional, but adds such a great kick of flavour. I'm going to add in some lemon zest. Toss that through. Oh, and that beautiful lemony citrus aroma is so enticing. Yum. It's like a little ray of sunshine for our pork. Now all that's left to do is serve up our beautiful stir fry. Another little sprinkling of sesame seeds. And there you go, the stir fry that is beautifully tender, has a huge amount of flavor, a little secret ingredient. And let's just see how we've gone. It is so great when something so simple to make is just incredibly tasty. That little hit of lemon at the end is so good. That little spiciness from that gochujang. And the pork, it's so tender, so good. Okay, now let's give this a try. This seems like the simplest stir fry, but the texture of that pork, it literally just melts in your mouth. It's like eating a piece of butter. You guys have to try this technique. Now to get that pork really uber tender, there's a couple of things we need to do. So I'm using pork fillet, and the first thing is that you often find this sort of silver, sinewy kind of stuff on your pork fillet. Now that is not ever going to get tender. We need to get rid of that. So using a really sharp knife, and you know, with Asian cooking, I find sharp knives really, really important because we're often doing just some of this really fine cutting work, and I've just nicked the edge of that sinew, and then I'm just running my knife along the edge there, holding the sinew, and the sharp knife blade is doing all that work for me. Just get rid of that. Keep going along, getting rid of that silvery sinew. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, we want to slice across the grain. So all of these little details are what is really going to set your dish apart. So the grain is going this way. I want to slice across it. And that also is going to keep each piece of pork really tender when you go to eat it. Now you can see how beautifully thin those pieces of pork are. Now we also want some ginger for our stir fry, and I want some in the marinade as well as in the stir fry itself. So I've got quite a large piece of ginger here, and a teaspoon is the easiest way to get that skin off. Now to get those really beautiful fine slices of ginger, you want to start off slicing into thin little pieces. So to start off with, you want to slice into nice thin sheets, and then just pile those up together. And now we want to create those fine little matchsticks. So I'm just going to set those strips aside, and then with the rest of my ginger, I'm going to add that to the pork for a tasty marinade. And a little bit of white pepper. Okay, now I also want some soy sauce. And then here are the 2 secret ingredients for getting that pork really super meltingly tender, and that is corn flour, and that's going to do 2 things. It's going to help with the tenderness of the pork and the mouthfeel of the pork, but it's also going to thicken our sauce. And now the baking soda. So without getting too food nerdy on you guys, the baking soda actually makes the surface of the meat more alkaline, and that will keep the meat more tender when it's cooked. So it's both the baking soda and the corn flour that's going to give us that really beautiful, soft, tender, velvety mouthfeel. Now we want to mix this with our hands because I want to make sure that each piece of pork gets its fair share of that marinade. So just by using those few extra little ingredients, we're really elevating our stir fry and keeping that meat really tender. Now the stir fry sauce, super simple. I want some soy sauce and some Chinese Shaoxing wine. Now this is a cooking wine and it adds a really beautiful fragrant aroma and flavor, but if you would like to leave alcohol out, you could just use a little bit of chicken stock as well. Oyster sauce, dark soy sauce, and just a dash of sugar, and give that a good mix. And my other little special ingredient for this one is Chinese 5-spice. Now I'm using my homemade Chinese 5-spice, and it has this beautiful, intense, pungent aroma and flavor. There's a recipe on my YouTube channel for that one. If not, you could just use store-bought. Now, as always, it's important to get everything sliced and diced before you start cooking a stir fry. So I've got my ginger, my sauce, my spring onion, garlic, and our marinated pork. Just some oil into your wok. And I don't want to start this off too hot because I don't want the garlic to burn. Just a nice, sensible sizzle there. Now in goes my ginger. Oh, and that smell, the ginger and the garlic, it is just my ultimate. Now I also want the spring onion, but I just want the white part in at the beginning because that's quite firm and it needs a little bit of cooking, and I'm going to save those other pieces for a bit later. Okay, now in goes my pork. And my biggest tip for whenever you're cooking protein in a wok is to spread the protein out so you're getting as much contact with the hot surface of the wok as possible. So now my pork is cooked and I'm going to add in my sauce. And because of that corn flour in our marinade mixture, that sauce is thickening up beautifully. And now I want in my green part of the spring onion. Finally at the end, I'm just going to pour in a dash of sesame oil and then turn the heat off, and that really keeps our sesame oil beautifully fragrant.